The First Great Escape, The Laundry Cart Heist. Subscribe to Deduce for more untold stories of the criminal underworld. The story of Joaquin Guzman, El Chapo, is not just a story of drugs, money, and power. It is, fundamentally, a story of escapes. His legendary breaks from maximum security prisons did more than just humiliate the Mexican government. They cemented his myth as an untouchable folk devil, a modern-day Houdini who could slip through the tightest of chains. Today, on Deduce, we begin a 5-part series unraveling the untold story of El Chapo's prison breaks. We start not with the elaborate tunnel, but with the first great escape that proved no cage could hold him. This is the story of his 2001 breakout from the Federal Center for Social Readaptation No. 2, known as Puente Grande. In 1993, after a bloody shootout in Guatemala, El Chapo was captured and handed over to Mexican authorities. He was considered one of the most powerful and dangerous drug lords in the world. The Mexican state was determined to make an example of him. They threw him into Puente Grande, a modern, high-security prison modeled after cutting-edge American penitentiaries. It was supposed to be the end of the line for the Sinaloa cartel's leader. The walls were thick, the guards were many, and the procedures were strict. On paper, it was inescapable. But El Chapo understood a fundamental truth that the architects of Puente Grande had overlooked. A prison is not just a structure of concrete and steel. It is a society, a microcosm of the world outside. And in any society, people can be bought, bullied, or seduced. His first task was to turn the prison from a place of punishment into his personal fortress and command center. He arrived with little, but his wealth and influence followed him through the gates. He began a systematic campaign of corruption that would become the blueprint for his entire incarceration. It started small: a generous payment to a guard for a better meal, a bribe to another for a cell phone. But it quickly escalated into a full-scale takeover of the prison's administrative functions. Subscribe to Deduce as we uncover the secrets behind the world's most secure prisons. El Chapo's operatives on the outside identified key personnel within the prison. They found the guards with financial troubles, the administrators with ambitions, the ones susceptible to temptation. They were offered a choice: plata or plomo, silver or lead, money or a bullet. Most chose the money. The price for cooperation was high, but the cost of refusal was higher. Soon, El Chapo wasn't just an inmate, he was the de facto warden. He paid the salaries of dozens of guards and officials, creating a shadow payroll that dwarfed their government wages. He controlled who entered his cell block, who searched his cell, and who monitored the security cameras. The director of the prison, along with 78 prison officials, were eventually found to be on his payroll. His life inside was not one of hardship. He enjoyed gourmet food, fine liquor, and the company of women who were smuggled into his cell. He conducted his cartel's business openly on a series of cell phones, directing shipments, ordering hits, and managing his multi-billion-dollar empire. The prison was his office, his sanctuary, and his base of operations. But as his legal appeals dwindled, he knew a transfer to an even more secure facility, or worse, extradition to the United States, was imminent. The time for a permanent exit had come. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. It did not require tunnels or helicopters. It required only the absolute control he had already purchased. On January 19, 2001, the stage was set. The guards on duty were his men. The surveillance cameras in his wing were conveniently malfunctioning or pointed away. The routine of the prison continued as normal, but beneath the surface, a meticulously choreographed escape was underway. Subscribe to Deduce for real stories of crime and consequence. The central prop in this drama was a simple laundry cart, a large wheeled hamper used to collect dirty uniforms and linens from the cells. It was a common sight, rolling through the corridors, ignored and inconspicuous. On that night, it was empty when it entered El Chapo's cell block. When it rolled out, it carried a very different kind of load. Joaquin Guzman, the most wanted man in Mexico, was curled up inside, hidden beneath a pile of soiled laundry. The image is almost comical. A kingpin, a billionaire, reduced to hiding in a bin of dirty clothes. But it was a stroke of psychological genius. No one was looking for a king in a beggar's chariot. The cart, pushed by a trusted guard posing as a laundry worker, rolled calmly through a series of checkpoints. At each point, the guards waved it through. They had been paid to see nothing, to ask no questions. They were part of the script, playing their roles to perfection. The cart passed through at least 10 security doors, each one buzzing open as it approached. It rolled through courtyards, down corridors, and finally out of the main prison gates. Once clear of the prison's perimeter, the cart was loaded into the back of a waiting truck. El Chapo climbed out, a free man. He disappeared into the night, leaving behind a nation in shock and a government in utter humiliation. The engineering marvel of this escape was not in its physical complexity, but in its human engineering. El Chapo didn't defeat the prison's security systems, he simply recruited the people who operated them. He proved that the strongest luck is useless if the person with the key is on your side. The search for him would be one of the largest in Mexican history, but he had vanished. He would remain at large for over 13 years, building his cartel into a global empire. His legend was born that night, not in a blaze of gunfire, but in the silent rolling wheels of a laundry cart. It was a stark lesson in the power of corruption, and a warning that his next capture would require a different strategy entirely. But as we will see in our next video, even the most secure prison would not be enough. The legend of El Chapo was just beginning, and his greatest escape was yet to come.
The Recapture, the Hotel Miramar Takedown. Subscribe to Deduce for a deeper look into the operations of the world's most powerful cartels. For 13 years, El Chapo Guzman was a ghost. His escape from Puente Grande in 2001 wasn't just a prison break, it was a transformation. He evaporated into the mountains of Sinaloa, a region so loyal to him that he was less a fugitive and more a returning king. His legend grew with every year he remained free. He was a folk hero to some, a demon to others, but above all, he was untouchable. The Mexican government, stung by the humiliation of his escape, was determined to find him. They launched massive military operations, offered huge rewards, and arrested countless associates. But El Chapo was always one step ahead, protected by a vast network of corruption, fear, and popular support. He moved between remote mountain hideouts, safe houses in cities, and luxurious estates, always surrounded by a private army. His security apparatus was a masterpiece of counterintelligence. He used a fleet of armored vehicles, sophisticated communication networks, and a team of lookouts, or halcones, who watched every road in town for miles. To get close to him was considered impossible. His power and influence only expanded during his years on the run. The Sinaloa Cartel became the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the world, with a reach spanning across more than 50 countries. El Chapo was no longer just a drug lord. He was a global brand, a symbol of audacious criminal success. But his success also made him a prime target. The pressure from the United States on the Mexican government was immense. Capturing El Chapo became the top priority for 2 administrations. The breakthrough did not come from a high-tech spy satellite or a daring raid. It came from the oldest tool in law enforcement, following the money and exploiting human error. For years, intelligence agencies had been patiently tracking his communications and financial networks. They were mapping his organization, identifying his key lieutenants, and looking for a pattern, a vulnerability. That vulnerability, ironically, was his own family. In early 2014, intelligence suggested that El Chapo was planning to reunite with his wife, Emma Coronel Aispuro, and their young twin daughters. He was a man who, despite his brutal business, was known to be a devoted family man. This human desire for connection would be his undoing. Subscribe to Dark Deduce to understand how the world's most wanted are tracked down. The trail led them to the city of Mazatlan, a popular coastal resort in his home state of Sinaloa. It was a bold move, hiding in plain sight in a tourist destination surrounded by crowds and noise. His specific hideout was a condominium in a nondescript, beige-colored building called the Hotel Miramar. From the outside, it looked like any other vacation rental, but on the inside, it was a fortress. The apartment was modified with reinforced doors, secret passages, and escape routes. His security detail was extensive and heavily armed. A direct assault would be a bloodbath with no guarantee of success. The Mexican Marines, a specially trained and notoriously secretive force, were tasked with the operation. They set up a meticulous surveillance operation around the Miramar. For days they watched. They noted the goings and comings of his guards. They identified the vehicles used by his network. They waited for the perfect moment. That moment came in the early hours of February 22, 2014. The Marines, acting on confirmed intelligence that El Chapo was inside, moved in. They did not storm the front door. Instead, they used the element of surprise. They entered through the apartment's bathroom window, bypassing the fortified main entrance entirely. The operation was swift, clinical, and over in minutes. There was little resistance. El Chapo was found in a bedroom with his wife, Emma. The man who had evaded capture for over a decade was apprehended without a single shot being fired. The images broadcast around the world were shocking. There was El Chapo, shirtless and in his underwear, being handcuffed by Mexican Marines. The myth of the untouchable king was shattered in an instant. He looked vulnerable, human. In the apartment, authorities found an arsenal of weapons, stacks of cash, and two-way radios. But the most telling discovery was personal. His twin daughters' birth certificates were on the nightstand. It was a poignant reminder of the domestic life he was trying to build, even from the shadows. His recapture was hailed as a major victory for the Mexican government. President Enrique Peña Nieto declared it a triumph for the rule of law. But the celebration was short-lived. Everyone, from the humblest farmer in Sinaloa to the most powerful agent in the DEA, knew one thing for certain. This was not the end. It was only the beginning of the next and most dramatic chapter. El Chapo was now in the most secure prison Mexico had ever built. The question on everyone's mind was not if he would stand trial, but if he could be held. The stage was set for his most legendary escape yet. Subscribe to Dark Deduce, because the story is far from over.
The masterpiece, the tunnel of engineering wonder. Subscribe to Deduce for incredible true stories that seem like fiction. El Chapo Guzman was back in a cage. But this was not Puente Grande. This was the Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 1, Altiplano, or Almoloya. A prison built after his 2001 escape, designed with one primary purpose: to ensure Joaquin Guzman could never break out again. It was the crown jewel of Mexico's penitentiary system, a fortress of concrete and technology. His cell was a 20 by 12-foot space, monitored 24/7 by a camera. He was allowed 1 hour of yard time per day, alone. His movements were tracked. His visitors were heavily screened. The guards were vetted and rotated frequently to prevent the kind of deep corruption that had plagued Puente Grande. It was, by all accounts, inescapable. Yet, on the night of July 11, 2015, just over a year after his celebrated capture, the impossible happened again. The story of his escape from Altiplano is not just a prison break. It is an engineering marvel, a project of staggering ambition and precision that rivals any legitimate construction project. It was a masterpiece of criminal ingenuity. It began, quite literally, from the ground up. The plan was simple in concept, but breathtakingly complex in execution. Dig a tunnel. But this would be no crude hole in the ground. This was a professionally engineered subterranean passageway, a feat of logistics, geology, and sheer audacity. The tunnel's entrance was hidden in the most innocuous of places, the shower area of his cell. In a small tiled corner, just out of sight of the surveillance camera, a tiny 20 by 20-inch opening was concealed beneath a removable floor slab. It was so small that El Chapo, a man of short stature, had to contort his body to slip inside. But once through that opening, he entered another world, a world his cartel had built just for him. Subscribe to Deduce as we explore the limits of human ingenuity. The tunnel itself was a wonder. It descended almost vertically for over 30 feet, using a professionally installed ladder with handrails. This vertical shaft was necessary to get beneath the prison's deep concrete foundations and seismic sensors. At the bottom, the tunnel leveled out and stretched for nearly a mile, precisely 5,905 feet, to a small half-built house in a nearby field. The scale was immense. It was tall enough for a man to walk upright without stooping. It was wide enough to move through comfortably. But the engineering went far beyond just digging a big hole. This was a fully functional subterranean highway. The tunnel was shored up with wooden supports and had a sophisticated ventilation system, using PVC pipes to pump fresh air from the exit point all the way to the cell. This was crucial, preventing the diggers from suffocating and eliminating the telltale smell of stale air. There was a rail system running its entire length. A modified motorcycle, likely a dirt bike, was mounted on the rails. This allowed the diggers to move soil and equipment in and out with incredible efficiency. It also meant that once El Chapo entered the tunnel, he could be whisked to freedom in a matter of minutes. The most astonishing feature was the lighting. The entire tunnel was wired with electric lights, powered by the electrical grid from the house at the exit point. They didn't rely on generators or batteries. They tapped directly into the public power supply. The logistics of the operation were mind-boggling.
An estimated 3,000 to 4,000 tons of soil had to be excavated and disposed of secretly. The noise from digging and construction had to be masked. The workers, a team of skilled engineers and miners, had to be recruited and kept silent. The house at the tunnel's end had to be purchased or rented without raising suspicion. The project required surveyors to ensure the tunnel ran in a perfectly straight line from the house to the exact spot under his cell. Even a small miscalculation in direction or depth could have led the tunnel into another cell, a common area, or worse, into a void that would cause a collapse. The precision was military grade. On the night of the escape, El Chapo simply waited for his moment. After his last security check, he stepped into his shower, lifted the hidden slab, and disappeared into the earth. He climbed down the ladder, boarded the cart on the rails, and was gone. By the time the guards realized his cell was empty, he was already in the safe house, where a change of clothes and a vehicle were waiting. He had vanished for the second time. The escape was a masterpiece. It was a brutal demonstration of the Sinaloa cartel's resources, its technical capabilities, and its absolute dedication to its leader. It was also the ultimate humiliation for the Mexican state. They had thrown him into their strongest box, and he had simply dug his way out from the bottom. The world was left in stunned disbelief. How could such a project go undetected? The answer, as we will explore in our next video, lies not just in the dirt, but in the deep, pervasive corruption that made it all possible. Subscribe to Deduce to uncover the secrets that hide in plain sight. The human factor. Corruption. The ultimate key. Subscribe to Deduce for analyses of the systems that shape our world. The tunnel under Altiplano prison was a miracle of engineering, but it was not the tunnel itself that allowed El Chapo Guzman to escape. The tunnel was merely the tool. The true key to his freedom, as it had been in 2001, was a force far more powerful than any machine. Systematic, brazen corruption. You cannot dig a nearly mile-long, lighted, ventilated tunnel to the exact spot under a specific prison cell without someone noticing. The idea that such a project could be completed through stealth alone is a fantasy. The untold story of the Altiplano escape is the story of the people who were paid to look the other way. It is a story of how the Sinaloa cartel, through a combination of bribes and threats, effectively co-opted the entire security apparatus surrounding Mexico's most secure prison. The corruption began at the very top. The former director of Altiplano and two other high-ranking prison officials were eventually convicted for their role in the escape. They were not just negligent, they were active participants in the plot. They received millions of dollars in bribes to facilitate the break. Their duties included ensuring guard rotations did not interfere with the construction, that surveillance footage was manipulated or erased, and that any suspicious activity reported by lower-level guards was quashed. They were the cartel's inside men, the guarantors of the operation's success. But it went far deeper than the administration. The guards on the ground, the very people tasked with watching El Chapo, were also compromised. Many were directly on the cartel's payroll. Others were threatened with violence against themselves and their families if they did not cooperate. The choice, as always, was plata or plomo. Subscribe to Deduce for a closer look at the dark side of power. Consider the practical challenges of the tunnel and how corruption solved them.
The noise, the digging, the construction, the sound of the motorcycle on the rails, it all made noise. Guards were paid to ignore the sounds, to dismiss them as construction work from outside the prison, or as normal prison noise. Any official who insisted on investigating the sounds was reassigned or paid off. The dirt. An estimated 4,000 tons of excavated soil had to be removed from the tunnel. This was not done under cover of darkness with wheelbarrows. It was likely removed in trucks over a period of months. This required the cooperation of guards at the prison gates, who would wave these trucks through without inspection. It may have even required bribes to local police, who would ignore convoys of trucks coming and going from a remote farmhouse at all hours. The logistics. The construction materials, wood, steel rails, PVC pipes, electrical wiring, all had to be brought to the site. Again, this required a coordinated effort to bypass security checkpoints and arouse no suspicion. Corrupt officials provided uniforms, IDs, and paperwork that made these deliveries appear legitimate. The intelligence. Perhaps the most critical rule of the corrupt officials was providing information. They gave the cartel the exact blueprints of the prison. They told them the location of seismic sensors. They provided the schedule for guard patrols and cell checks. They even gave details about the construction of El Chapo's specific cell, allowing the engineers to know exactly where to dig and how to breach the floor. Without this inside information, the tunnel could easily have been detected or built in the wrong place. The night of the escape itself was a symphony of corruption. The surveillance camera in El Chapo's cell was likely looped to show an empty cell or a still image. The guards who were supposed to check on him did so from a distance, if at all. The alarm was never raised until he was long gone. This was not a failure of the system. It was a takeover of the system. The Mexican government had built a perfect vault, but the Sinaloa cartel had simply bought the combination. The aftermath was a predictable farce. Dozens of prison officials and guards were arrested. The government launched investigation after investigation, but the damage was done. The escape proved that El Chapo's power and influence were not diminished by his imprisonment. They were, if anything, more potent than ever. It demonstrated that his reach could extend into the very heart of the state's institutions. He didn't just escape from a prison. He exposed the Mexican justice system as being in many ways an extension of his own criminal enterprise. But this second escape would also be his last. The international manhunt that followed would be unlike any other, and it would lead to a final capture that would close the book on the legend of El Chapo, the escape artist. Subscribe to Dark Deduce as we approach the final chapter.
The Final Capture, The End of the Escape Artist. Subscribe to Dark Deduce for the conclusions to history's most gripping stories. The second escape from Altiplano prison was El Chapo's greatest triumph, but it was also the beginning of his end. The audacity of the tunnel escape created a political firestorm in Mexico and immense pressure from the United States. The Mexican president, Enrique Peña Nieto, was humiliated on the global stage. The message was clear: capture Guzman, and this time, do not let him go. The manhunt that ensued was all-consuming. It was no longer just a drug war. It was a personal vendetta for the Mexican state. For 6 months, El Chapo was on the run. But the world had changed since his first period of freedom. Technology had advanced, and the cartel's traditional methods of communication were now its greatest vulnerability. The key to finding the ghost was to follow his digital shadow. The break came from an unexpected source.
his own vanity, and his desire to control his legacy. Flush with the success of his escape, El Chapo began seeking out a Hollywood biopic. He reached out to famous actors and producers, including Sean Penn. This foray into the world of celebrity would prove to be a catastrophic mistake. While the meeting with Penn itself did not directly lead to his capture, the digital trails surrounding it did. The cartel's communication protocols were complex. They used encrypted devices, swapped phones frequently, and used couriers to avoid interception. But contacting international movie stars required breaking those protocols. It introduced new phone numbers, new email addresses, and new patterns of behavior into a system that was previously closed. It created a crack in his armor, and intelligence agencies were ready to pry it open. The Mexican government, with crucial assistance from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration and other agencies, began a relentless cyber and signals intelligence campaign. They weren't just looking for phone calls, they were tracking everything. They monitored the infrastructure. They tracked the power usage in remote areas of Sinaloa, looking for compounds that had unusually high electricity consumption. They used satellite imagery to identify hideouts. But most importantly, they penetrated his communication network. They managed to get a fix on the phones used by his top lieutenants and his inner security circle. They used triangulation and other methods to narrow down his location to the city of Los Mochis, Sinaloa. Subscribe to Dark Deduce for the final word on the world's most infamous criminals. The operation in Los Mochis was the antithesis of the Hotel Miramar capture. This time, the Marines were not taking any chances. On January 8, 2016, they stormed a house in a residential neighborhood after receiving a tip about armed men inside. What followed was a ferocious firefight. 5 of El Chapo's gunmen were killed, and 1 Mexican Marine was wounded. But when the smoke cleared, El Chapo was not there. He had once again slipped away at the last moment, but this time his escape route was crude and desperate. He and his security chief had fled through a hidden door in the house that led into a storm drain. They were now on foot, running through the city's sewer tunnels. It was a far cry from the engineered luxury of his escape tunnel. This was the flight of a cornered animal. The Marines, however, had anticipated this. They had the entire area cordoned off. They patrolled the streets above the sewers, listening for any sound from below. A few hours later, a manhole cover on a nearby street shifted. El Chapo and his bodyguard emerged, filthy and exhausted, hoping to hijack a car. They were immediately spotted by Marines. There was no shootout this time. The legendary escape artist, the man who had built tunnels and corrupted entire prisons, was captured on a public street next to a stolen car. His run was over. This time, the Mexican government learned its lesson. There would be no more chances. He was immediately transferred back to Altiplano, but his stay was brief. He was constantly monitored, with lights in his cell kept on 24/7 and guards watching his every move. Within a month, he was extradited to the United States, to a prison system from which there would be no escape. His trial in Brooklyn was a spectacle, detailing his vast empire, his brutal methods, and his legendary escapes. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. He now resides in the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. He is held in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. His cell is made of solid concrete and steel. His communications with the outside world are virtually non-existent. There are no guards to bribe, no showers to hide under, and no earth beneath his feet to dig through. The story of El Chapo, the escape artist, had finally reached its conclusion. His legend was built on his ability to break out of cages. His final cage was built specifically to ensure that legend would die. His story is a dark saga of power, corruption, and ingenuity. It is a reminder of the vast reach of organized crime and the fragility of the institutions designed to stop it. But it is also a lesson in inevitability. No empire, legal or illegal, lasts forever, and no escape artist can run forever. Subscribe to Dark Deduce for more deep dives into the stories that define our world. Let us know in the comments which part of El Chapo's story shocked you the most. And as always, subscribe for more untold stories from the shadows. This is Dark Deduce.